Greetings to all the honorable judges, fellow participants, and everyone present here. My name is Fadha Zematulsna, and I am here as the first speaker of the proposition team during the motion today. The House would prioritize stability and economic growth over aggressive democratic reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, a nation is built based on solid institutional foundation. It is built by social and civil stability. The very first thing a nation must require is its stability and economic growth. What is that and why is it so important for the nation? Firstly, stability is the government's ability to maintain the rule of law and social order. It means a state where policies don't change every week, where the streets are safe from violent unrest, and where people can plan for the next 10 years without fear of a sudden collapse. While economic growth is the expansion of a nation's capacity to produce goods, services, provide millions of job fields for its people, which increase the national income and raises its intensity of its gross domestic product, which guarantee the progress of a country in the future and raises the standard of living for every citizen. When a country is unstable, it's the most vulnerable people who pay the price. That is why we have to prioritize the economic stability and growth. Firstly, before rushing into an aggressive reforms. Why is it so important? It's because when there's an economic collapse, such as inflation, deflation, and etc., the actual thing that we needed is not the aggressive reforms. You can't ask people to care about politics when their stomach is empty, their house is crumbling, and their children cannot afford to go to a school. In order to make a democratic reform, we have to fulfill the very basic thing our citizens needed: the growth in their economy where they don't have to worry about food, hygiene, and healthcare. Moving on to my arguments, why is it more important to stability and economic growth rather than aggressive democratic reforms? Firstly, people don't actually need those democratic reforms to survive. Why? Because the change of political positions, such as political leader, the new position of president, or the restructuring of a parliament, doesn't put food on the table. Yes, whether it is true that the change of political position to a much better person would change their lives, but there's no instant effect to them immediately. Will a change of leader automatically bring the food to the table? No. Pays for the bills? Also no. That is why they don't need all of that to survive. When we look at a family living in poverty, their primary concern isn't whether they have the right to multi-party election, but it is whether the local clinic has medicine and whether the price of rice is stable. The reality is that aggressive reforms often bring transition crisis when strikes, protests, and policy gridlock that the poor simply cannot afford. For example, let's take a look at our own case in our beloved country, Indonesia. The most recent and significant case is the implementation of the Harmonization of Tax Regulation Law, aka UUHPP. If VAT was raised from 10% to 11% in April 2022, with a planned hike to 12% by January 2025. Critics argue that VAT is a regressive tax, meaning it takes a large percentage at income from low-income earners than from a high-income earners. Since VAT is applied to consumption, it directly increases the price of daily goods and services, squeezing the purchasing power of the middle and lower classes. This can happen because the welfare percentage of the Indonesian society is very low, that the income doesn't entirely cover everything, which can make the citizens collapse from just a sudden change of a percentage number of the tax, even if it's just for a percent. Secondly, a healthy and stable democracy can only be reached in a stable nation with proper per capita income level. The economic growth provides a nation with the proper education system. And educated citizens is the absolute requirement so that democracy does not fall into populism. The thing is, when a citizen is provided with a great education, each of them will grow into a smart person, a respected one with an ability to know what's good and what's not, which will succeed the democratic reformation because they actually know what they're doing, rather than an uneducated society who lacks its ability. However, aggressive reforms often create a legal uncertainty if not implemented properly, which is why without capital and the educated society to fulfill the goal, the state cannot fund the infrastructure needed to maintain of democracy. Thirdly, democracy reforms have often introduced drastic open chaos. Illegal institutions are not yet mature. This newfound freedom can quickly devolve into instability. When a country tries to change its entire political system overnight, its willing are received for disaster. It's like opening a floodgates before you've even built the dam. Instead of helping people, the sudden change just washes everything away. If the courts and the police aren't ready to handle that much change at once, freedom just ends up looking like a mess. People will turn against each other because when people are hungry and the economy is a mess, democracy doesn't make them unite. Instead, it makes them fight. Then we scared away the investors. Business and other countries won't put their money into a place where the rules change every week. If there are constant protests, or if the government keeps swapping out because of the political drama, no one is going to build the factories or roads that we need. Without that money, the country stays stuck. So what do we need to prioritize the stability and income over the aggressive democratic reforms? Firstly, instead of jumping straight into the messy elections or total freedom of the press, shift the focus into creating a predictable legal system. We maintain a strong policy force to prevent raids and political unrest that often follows sudden political changes. Secondly, prioritize the government budget into fiscal policy, like build infrastructure, focus on manufacturers and subsidies for the poor to increase the economic growth. Thirdly, fill the government position with an expert in each sector, like the economists and engineers for manufacturers, that actually know what to do rather than those popular politicians. In conclusion, a proper democratic reforms can only be reached with a proper stability and economic growth, which is why we need to prioritize those first instead of just changing the democratic system overnight. In order to build a stable nation, we have to prioritize what the society needs, not just what we thought was important but not actually needed. And for all of that, I am proud to propose.